Hello, good day. My topic is all about determining sampling techniques in research. Now, sampling techniques or determining sampling techniques is so important in research since it is how we can see if research is indeed valid or if indeed our planned people or our respondents is indeed represented in a way that is valid. Okay, so introduction. Now, in understanding this, let's first understand kung ano ba yung population and sample. Okay, so population is the entire group that you want to draw. So, here it is. So, pangkalahatan. No, to draw the conclusion about. So, sino sila. And, imposible naman na sa research talaga, malahat-lahat mo. Okay, yung mga, so, statisticians provided a way to have a ratio na, makagawa kung ano yung valid. So, they have it sampling. So, ano yung sample? Sample is the specific group of individuals that you will collect data from. Okay, so, meron kasing enough lang na sample. No, hindi naman talaga pangkalahatan or the population itself, no, meron enough sample na kung ilan lang yung pwede in terms of statistics na valid naman din. And, the term of na paano tayo kukuha ng sample is sampling. Okay, that's sampling techniques. And we have now, ano ba yung sampling frame? Let's understand this. Now, sampling frame is the actual list of individuals that the sample will be drawn from. Okay? Ideally, it should include the entire target population and nobody who is not part of that population. Now, the sample size, the number of individuals you should include in your sample depends on various factors, including the size and variability of the population and your research design. There are different sample size, calculators and formulas depending on what you want to achieve with statistical analysis. Okay, so first, meron tayong probability sampling methods. Ano to? Probability means having the probability that members of the population has a chance to be selected. It is mainly used in quantitative research if you want to produce results that are representative of the whole population. Probability sampling techniques are the most valid choice. Now, meron tayong features dito. Ano yung probability sampling? Okay, features of probability as summarized by Alston and Bowles, 1988, are given below. Probability sampling, its population units has an equal or known chance of selection. Mapipili talaga with degree of representativeness. Makukuha talaga yung representativeness. And it allows researcher to generalize results favored by quantitative researchers, and it has four main types. First is random sampling techniques, simple random sampling, systematic random sampling, stratified random sampling, and cluster random sampling. No, so isa-isahin po natin kung ano to. First is we have the simple random sampling. What's this? Every member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. Your sampling frame should include the whole population. So to conclude this type of sampling, you can use tools like random number generators or other techniques that are based entirely on chance. For example, you want to select a simple random sample of 100 employees of company X or whatever company is that. You assign the number to every employee in the company database from 1 to 1,000. And use random sampling number generator to select 100 numbers. Okay, pipili ka lang, okay? So, it's like this. Next, we move on naman to systematic sampling. It's similar to simple random sampling, but it is usually slightly easier to conduct. Now, every member of the population is listed with a number, but instead of randomly generating numbers, individuals are chosen at regular intervals. Meron po interval, katulad nito. Okay? So, after dalawa naman, so like that, no? Pili ka na naman. So, ganon. Okay? For example, all employees of the company are listed in alphabetical order. Now, from the first 10 numbers, you randomly select a starting point, number 6. From number 6 onwards, in every 10 person. Okay? So, para pong ganito, no? So, after nito, numbers to, pili na naman tayo. So, parang ganon, okay? On the list is selected, example 6, 16 by 10s po kasi to, 26, 36, and so on. Okay? And you end up with a sample of 100 people. Now, if you use this technique, it is important to make sure that there is no hidden pattern in the list that might skew the sample. For example, if the HR database groups employees by team and team members are listed in order of seniority, there is a risk that your interval might skip other people in junior roles, resulting in a sample that is skewed towards senior employees. Okay? Next naman is we have the stratified sampling. So, ano tong stratified sampling? Stratified sampling involves dividing, okay, dinidivide po, okay, the population into subpopulations that may differ in important ways. Now, it allows you to draw more precise conclusions by ensuring that every subgroup is properly represented in the sample. To use this sampling method, you divide the population into subgroups called strata, okay, stratified, based on the relevant characteristic, for example, by age, by gender range, income bracket, or job role. Based on the overall proportions of the population, you calculate how many people should be sampled from each subgroup. Then, you should random or systematically sampling to select a sample to each subgroup. Example dito, the company has 800 female employees and 200 male employees. Now, you want to ensure that sample reflects the gender balance of the company, so you sort the population into true strata based on gender, sa babae ba or lalaki, or like any other gender. Then, you use random sampling on each group, selecting 80 women and 20 men, which give you a representative sample of 100 people. So, dinivide po niya. Okay? The next one is the cluster sampling. Cluster sampling also involves dividing the population into subgroups, but, okay, may but po, each subgroup should have similar characteristic to the whole sample. Instead of sampling individuals from each subgroup, you randomly select entire subgroup. If it is practically possible, you might include every individual from each sample cluster. If the cluster themselves are large, you can also sample individuals from within each cluster using one of the techniques above. Now, this is called multi-stage sampling na rin. This method is good for dealing with large and dispersed population, but there is more risk of error in the sample, as there could be substantial differences between clusters. It's difficult to guarantee that the sample clustered are really representative of the whole population. For example, the company has offices in 10 cities across the country, all with roughly the same number of employees in similar roles. You don't have the capacity to travel to every office to collect the data, so you use random sampling to select 3 offices lang. These are your cluster. Kaya po tinawag natin yung cluster. So dito po, okay, example, 5 sila na grupo. Okay, 5 sa grupo. Pumili ka lang dyan ng mga cluster. That could represent your sample or the population. Next naman, we move on. Tapos na tayo sa probability sampling method. We move on naman sa non-probability sampling method. So, ano to? So, non-probability sampling method is a sample technique which individuals are selected based on non-random criteria, and not every individual has the chance of being included. Okay? Now, this type of sample is easier and cheaper to access, but it has higher risk of sampling bias. Kasi walang chance kasi, hindi kasi klaro yung chance ng lahat na may pipili. Now, that means that the inference you can make about the population are weaker with probability samples, and your conclusions may be more limited. Now, if you use a non-probability sample, you should still aim to make it representative of the population as possible. Non-probability sampling techniques are often used in exploratory and qualitative. Okay, di ba? Sa probability natin is quantitative talaga, by numbers talaga, kasi nare-represent niya talaga mostly. Dito, qualitative lang po. Nako? In this type of research, the aim is not to test hypothesis about a bird population, but to develop an initial understanding. It's more on explaining the phenomenon, qualitative, of a small or under-researched population. So, ano yung characteristics ng non-probability sampling? So, each population unit does not have an equal chance of selection, okay? And no claim to be representative, and does not necessarily allow the researcher to generate result and favored by qualitative researchers. For example, accidental or convenience or availability sampling, quota sampling, purposive, and snowball sampling. So, isa-isahin natin ano to, okay? First, we move on to convenience sampling. From the word itself, convenience sampling simply includes the individuals who happen to be most accessible to the researcher. Kung ano yung convenient, okay? This is an easy and inexpensive way to gather initial data, but there is no way to tell if the sample is representative of the population, so it can produce generalized results, okay? Example, you are researching opinions about student support services in your university. So after each of your class, you ask your fellow students to complete a survey on the topic. So, convenient lang po, okay? Kakilala, ganon, okay? This is a convenient way to gather data, but as you only observe with students taking the same classes as you at the same level, the sample is not representative of all students at your university. Okay? Ganon yung nangyayari. The next one naman is the voluntary response sampling. Now, it is similar to convenience sampling. Voluntary response sample is mainly based on ease of access. Instead of the researchers choosing participants and directly contacting them, people volunteer themselves. Okay, kaya nga po voluntary. By responding to a public online survey. So, nakikita po natin to, di ba? Kung, I think the YouTube has this, okay? Yung mga voluntary lang po. Okay, voluntary response samples are always at least somewhat biased at some people will inherently be more likely to volunteer than others. Hindi pa kasi tayo sure kung yung mga nagbo-volunteer, sila tagay yung mga sample na kailangan natin. Okay, sample data. Example, you send out the survey to all students at your university and a lot of students decide to complete it. This can certainly give you some insights into the topic, but the people who responded are more likely to be those who have strong opinions about the student support services. So you can't be sure that their opinions are representative of all students. Okay? The next one is the purposive sampling. Now, this type of sampling, also known as judgment sampling, involves the researcher using their expertise to select a sample that is most useful to purposes of the research. It is often used in qualitative research where the researcher wants to gain detailed knowledge about a specific phenomenon rather than to make statistical inference or in compared to quantitative, or where the population is very small and specific. An effective purposive sample must have clear criteria and rationale for inclusion. So, para pong ganito. Okay? Example of that. Example, you want to know more about the opinions and experiences of disabled students at your university. So, you purposely select a number of students with different support needs in order to gather a varied range of data in order to experience with. So, may purpose na po. Okay? Hindi lang po yung convenient, parang ganun lang. The next one is the snowball sampling. Most common. Familiar? If the population is hard to access, snowball sampling can be used to recruit. Parang nagre-recruit, parang networking lang. Okay? Participants via other participants. The number of people you have access to snowballs as you get in contact with more people. For example, you are researching experiences of homelessness in your city. Since there is no list of all homeless people in your city, probability sampling isn't possible. So, you met one person who agrees to participate in research and she puts you in contact with others. So, contact ng contact, parang networking nga po, okay? With other homeless people that she knows. So, kakilala. Okay, may kakilala ko. Okay, so yung kakilala mo, refer natin o refer mo para masurvey natin sila. Parang ganun lang, okay? Parang snowball. I think the last part is the quota sampling. In many large-scale applications of sampling procedures, it is not always possible or desirable to list all members of the population and randomly select elements from that list. The reasons for using any alternative procedures include cost, timeliness, and convenience. One alternative procedure is quota sampling. Now, this technique is often used by market researchers and those taking political pools. Okay, so, tapos na yung election. So, parang ito po yung ginagamit eh. So, meron silang quota na ito lang yung kukunin namin number and ganito, ganyan. Usually, when this technique is used, the population of interest is large and there are no ready-made list of names available from which to sample randomly. Okay, so, now meron tayo itong examples and advantages and limitations of 4 sampling techniques. Meron tayo ditong simple random sampling, stratified, convenience, and of course, quota. So, makikita mo natin dito yung medyo kaibahan ng 4 na to, dalawa sa probability and dalawa naman sa non-probability. So, first, we move on to simple random sample. Example is that when there are 1,000 names, names of all children are placed into computer database. Now, the computer is then instructed to randomly select 100 names. Now, these children and their parents are then contacted, kino-contact. Advantages dito is that representative of meron representative yung each population. Limitations naman, may be difficult to obtain the list and maybe more expensive naman po. Okay? Next naman is the stratified random sampling. The names of all 1,000 children are placed into computer database and organized by grade, 6th grade ba yan, 7th grade, or to 8th grade. Now, the computer is then instructed to randomly select 35 names from each of the 3 grades. So, 35 sa 6 grades, 35 na naman sa 7, at 35 naman sa 8. So, in a stratified po, okay? May strata. These children and their parents are then, pag napili na, is kontakin naman. Okay? Kailangan na po talaga i-contact, no? So, representative of the population, yun yung advantage siya. Mabibigyan talaga ng representative yung population. And maybe difficult to obtain the list and maybe more expensive din naman. The next part naman is the convenience, okay? Sampling technique convenience. Example dito is that the researchers knows one of the middle school teachers and the teacher volunteers here 35 students. So, kakilala niya yung teacher, no? Convenient, no? May kakilala. Now, these children and their parents are then contacted. Advantage, it is simple, easy, convenient. No complete members are listed. And limitations dito, pwede niyang hindi mabigyan representative yung population. And lastly is the quota sampling, non-probability. Now, using a middle school directory, the researcher selects, no? So, may quota na siya. Yung pipiliin niya na quota, 20 lang, no? Selects 26 grade boys, 26 grade girls, and 7 grade boys, and 27 grade girls, and 28 grade boys, and 28 grade girls. Now, these children and their parents are then contacted. So, may quota, kinukota niya po yan. Advantage dito is that simple lang, easy, convenient, no complete member listed needed. And limitations nga lang dito, may not be representative of the population. Okay? So, here's the reference of that. Okay? You can just check here, okay, if you have some further questions, and God bless you all, and thank you everyone for listening. Okay?